Welcome, everybody. So nice to see so many of you here. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon for the launch of Labor for Palestine's new campaign, Labor Against Apartheid. This is a really exciting moment for us. This is the start of a campaign that we're hoping can really expand and deepen Palestine solidarity in the labor movement right across the country. A campaign to give organizers the tools and the resources that they need to make sure that the labor movement is really playing the important role that it's capable of playing in the liberation of Palestine. And we couldn't have a better panel to help us launch this campaign. We've got speakers who are active in both anti-apartheid and labor struggles from Palestine, South Africa, and Canada. And we'll come to that more in a few minutes. But for now, I'll just introduce myself. I'll introduce a few logistics. So my name is Aidan McDonald. I'm a member of Labor for Palestine, and I'm involved in labor and community organizing in Toronto. And I want to acknowledge that the land that I'm coming to you from today is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that we do have French and English interpretation for this meeting. So if you want to switch to French or switch to English, you'll just need to click the icon for interpretation, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and choose the language that you'd like to listen in. And I also want to acknowledge and thank CISO, the Centre International de Solidarité Ouvrière, which is always an amazing supporter of Labor for Palestine, for providing us with the resources for interpretation and also for translating our campaign materials. Just in terms of format for today, each of our presenters will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A session at the end as well. So if you have questions, either for the organizers or for the speakers, don't hesitate to ask. You'll just need to click the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you just need to type in your question and submit it. Now, because this is the launch of Labor for Palestine's Labor Against Apartheid campaign, before we get to our speakers, I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk you through what that campaign is about and really how you can be a part of it. So as I mentioned off the top, this is a campaign that is really envisioned to spark and to strengthen Palestine solidarity in the labor movement right across the country. We want to be able to give organizers the tools and the resources and the confidence to build organizing around Palestine in your unions and in your workplaces. So, how can you start a Palestine Solidarity Committee in your union? We can support you with that. If your union has already passed a resolution in support of Palestine, how can you take action to implement that resolution? If your union hasn't yet passed a resolution in support of Palestine, how can you get one passed? How can you start working just to increase awareness and understanding of Palestine amongst your coworkers and amongst your union comrades? Why is Palestine a labor issue? Why should we care about it as workers in Canada? So with the Labor Against Apartheid campaign, we can support with all of those things. Now, obviously, this campaign is framed around the analysis of apartheid and on the understanding that Israel is committing the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian people. And there really is a growing international consensus around that analysis. We know that Palestinians and international solidarity activists have been talking about apartheid for a long time, but in recent years, it's become more understood in more mainstream circles. So we've seen organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and the Israeli NGO B'Tselem, all of them have also adopted this term and said that this is what's happening. What's happening in Palestine is apartheid. Now, it's important to note that when we talk about Israeli apartheid, we're not just making a comparison with South African apartheid. Apartheid is a legally defined term under international law. It's a crime under international law, and the basic definition of apartheid is that it is the systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another. And that is what we see in Palestine. We see systematic oppression and domination of Palestinians by the Israeli state. And that oppression and domination, it plays out in a lot of different ways and really has become more obvious just in recent weeks with the installation of a far-right government in Israel, which isn't even trying to hide its settler colonial ambitions. Like all people of the world, Palestinians have a fundamental right to freedom, justice, and equality. And as trade unionists, we are compelled to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for liberation, just as we did in the struggle for freedom from apartheid in South Africa. There's so much potential for the labor movement to play a real concrete role in that struggle. So again, whether it's passing a resolution, whether it's implementing a resolution that already exists, whether it's starting a solidarity committee or just building awareness, Labor for Palestine can play a supporting role in any of those things through this Labor Against Apartheid campaign. So as part of the campaign, we've developed a Palestine and the Labor Movement 101 presentation that can be delivered to union locals, to labor councils, anywhere right across the country. So we want you to invite us, ask us to come in and make a presentation. You can send an email to us at the email address that's in the chat, and we'll set something up. We'll come and deliver that presentation or support you in being able to deliver the presentation. We also have put together fact sheets and resources on apartheid, on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, on responding to allegations of anti-Semitism, on Canadian complicity with Israeli apartheid. We have also put together a toolkit with step-by-step guidelines on how you can start a committee in your local, how you can pass a resolution, how you can concretely act on a resolution, step-by-step guides on any of those things. So the fact sheets are on our website now, which the link for that is in the chat now, and the toolkit will be uploaded online soon as well. So it's really important to note that here today, this isn't just a one-off event. This is really the start of a campaign that we want you to be a part of. We want you to take this up in your union or in your workplace. And to make that happen, we're inviting you to join a short meeting that's going to happen on Thursday, February 2nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to take this campaign and run with it in your union or in your workplace, that's where we're going to talk more about how to do that. Or if you want to be part of the central organizing of this campaign and to help roll it out in a central way, we'll talk about that as well. We'll talk about ways for you to be involved in that also. So a link for that meeting is in the chat shortly. It's going to be, again, February 2nd, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll remind you about all those next steps again throughout this webinar. But really, let's make this happen together. Let's build the force of Palestine solidarity in the labor movement in Canada, and let's get moving on it. We've put together a toolkit that has step-by-step guidelines on how you can start a committee in your local or in your workplace, how you can pass a resolution, how you can concretely act on a resolution, kind of step-by-step guides on how to do any of those things. So the fact sheets are up on our website now. You'll be able to see those fact sheets at the link that's going to be in the chat in a moment. And the toolkit with the step-by-step guidelines will be up on the website soon as well. And really, I think the most important thing for us is that this event that we're having today, this is not a one-off event. This is a start of a campaign that we want you to be part of. And we want you to take this campaign up in your union or in your workplace. So to make that happen, we're inviting you to join a short meeting on Thursday, February 2nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to take this campaign and just run with it in your union or in your workplace, that's where we're going to talk more about how to do that. Or if you want to be part of the central organizing and rollout of this campaign across the country, we'll talk about how you can be part of that as well. So a link will come into the chat in a moment for that meeting, February 2nd, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll remind you about those next steps again, throughout the webinar. So really, let's make this movement happen together. Let's build the force of the Palestine solidarity movement through the labor movement in Canada. and let's do our part for the liberation of Palestine. So enough for me. I'm going to move on to introduce the first of our guest speakers. So first up, we have Lina Miari. So Lina is an assistant professor of anthropology in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences and in the Institute of Women's Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. She is the head of the Union of Faculty and Employees at Birzeit University. She has a special interest in the geopolitics of knowledge production, critical feminist theory, revolutionary movements, and decolonizing methodologies. Her research focuses on the formation of revolutionary subjectivity in colonial contexts and the practice of sumud among Palestinian political prisoners. So welcome, Lina. I'll ask you to just turn on your camera and over to you.
Thank you, Aiden. And good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be with you today. In my talk, I want to emphasize the importance of labor unions' support and radical solidarity with Palestine, and what radical solidarity with Palestine means for social and economic justice mass movements around the globe. To do so, I will focus on Palestine's position in the global struggle against colonial, imperial, and capitalist domination, oppression, and exploitation, and for liberation and social justice struggle. Ghassan Kanafani, a Palestinian novelist and revolutionary who was assassinated by Israel in 1972, once said that the Palestinian cause is not a cause for Palestinians only, but a cause for every revolutionary, wherever he or she is, as a cause for the exploited and oppressed masses in our era. Kanafani's words lay the framework for the connection between Palestinian liberation and social justice struggle, and other radical anti-imperial, anti-capitalist, and social justice struggles. Kanafani highlights the global significance of the Palestinian struggle and positions the Palestinian cause at the heart of every struggle against exploitation and oppression. He emphasizes the intertwinement of the anti-Zionist and anti-imperial struggles, though there is important divergences in the contexts of each struggle. Anti-imperialism is a node of connection among Palestinian and other global struggles. The Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine, like other settler colonial projects, aimed to control the land of Palestinians, alienate them by killing and displacement, to create a colonial entity on the ruins of their towns and villages. The British colonial authority, which ruled Palestine under mandate from 1917 to 1948, bolstered this effort. The British colonial authorities supported the Zionist project so it could establish a colonial entity in the heart of the Arab world to protect its economic interests and continue its control of the area, disregarding the interests and aspirations of the Arab Palestinian people. In establishing itself as part of the European colonial enterprise and its claimed civilizing mission, the Zionist movement, facilitated by British colonial authorities, dispossessed Palestinian lands, depopulated Palestinian villages and towns, and expelled more than 2/3 of native Palestinians who became refugees in 1948. Israel was officially established as the physical embodiment of the Zionist settler colonial project. Different from colonial projects that aim to exploit the raw materials and labor power of the colonized native people, the Zionist settler colonial project aims to dispossess the land and eliminate its people to replace them with a new group. This project of settlement and colonization continued to expand with the occupation of the remaining parts of Palestine in 1967. The same rationale led Zionist leadership to dispossess Palestinian lands, eliminate Palestinian presence, and build settlements in Palestinian lands following the Oslo peace process signed in 1993. Israel used the Oslo framework to deepen territorial fragmentation by turning the West Bank into a series of separated enclaves, effectively cutting off spatial and social continuity with the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. Settlements have rapidly expanded and been fortified by a set of military installations, settler-only roads, surveillance technologies, roadblocks, and other infrastructures. Since Oslo, the number of settlers has more than doubled in the West Bank. The post-Oslo years have also been characterized by the imposition of a severe closure regime, which places restrictions on the movement of people and goods and enforces a separation between Palestinian communities and the external world. Moreover, Israel imposes an internal closure that aims to disconnect Palestinian towns and villages from each other and between the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem through the use of military checkpoints, barriers, ditches, and roadblocks. The construction of the separation wall in 2002 caused a slow but cruel suffocation of normalcy that adds challenges to practicing everyday activities such as sleeping, eating, going to work, school, or hospital, and visiting friends and relatives. On the other hand, Israel imposes an external closure by controlling borders and international crossing points to Jordan and Egypt, as well as preventing the Palestinians from having their own airport or seaport. The daily Israeli colonial violations of Palestinian rights, including the forcible transfer of Palestinians, the expansion of colonial settlements, settler violence, the closure and blockade of the Gaza Strip, are not separated or stand-alone violations, but rather a part and parcel of Israel's settler colonialism and apartheid, designed to maintain systematic and institutionalized oppression and domination over the Palestinian people as a whole. Palestinians had resisted the settler colonial project since its inception through different means. Mass and union organizations were one of such means. Mass organizations proliferated in the 1967 Palestinian occupied territory, the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, in the mid-1970s. While specific leftist forces initiated their formation, the National Liberation Movement as a whole adopted mass organization. A configuration of factors led to the founding of mass organizations as open, semi-legal structures designed to mobilize and work among specific sectors within the population, and which actively sought to recruit new membership and engage in sustained effort to widen the social base of their membership and constituency. They included women's organizations, student and youth organizations, labor blocs and unions, and voluntary work organizations. And they each defined themselves as an organic component of the national liberation movement that takes political stands for the liberation struggle. The current continuation of the Zionist settler colonial project and its dispossession of Palestinian lands draws power from US, Canadian, and other imperial support, while the global regime is composed of conservative politics that support power, colonial, imperial, and capitalist oppressive structures. The opposite voices and practices should come from the masses who struggle against the dominating power structures that exploit the masses locally and support imperial world order globally. Solidarity comes from radical political and ethical positions committed to the struggles of the oppressed and exploited worldwide. Solidarity with Palestinians is not expected from movements that support domination, oppression, and exploitation within their own societies. Therefore, labor unions, whose main objective is to establish truly liberated, just societies, are those expected to support liberation and social justice struggles globally. Labor unions have a proud tradition of standing up against oppression and halt support for colonial racist regimes. The Global Trade Union had played a key and inspiring role in its courageous commitment to justice and adoption of concrete labor-led sanctions against oppressive regimes. The union boycott of apartheid South Africa stands out as a bright example of this tradition of effective solidarity. Building alliances among social justice movements in which labor unions constitute a central component is the way to build a different world liberated from imperial, colonial, and capitalist exploitation everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. It's so important for us to know and to understand, the colonial and capitalist roots of, the occupation of Palestine, and how this is that the Palestinian struggle for liberation is a struggle against colonialism that has this element of capitalist oppression and intervention, and that's really important for us to keep in mind, and also just to understand the role of the labor movement in Palestine in the national liberation struggle. So valuable for us to get those insights from you. So thank you. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, who is Anna Lipman. So Anna is a third-generation Ashkenazi Jewish migrant on Turtle Island and a first-generation settler in Canada. She's a PhD student in the sociology department at York University, where she's a member of the Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 3903. Her research looks at identity and how young people's thoughts about themselves are influenced by the world around them. Anna organizes with several groups in Toronto, including Showing Up for Racial Justice and Independent Jewish Voices. Anna has been active in the labor movement since joining her first union at 19 years old. She served her various unions as a shop steward, a young workers rep, and a health and safety representative. So Anna, over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today and for coming out to this important event. I'm really honored and humbled to be on this panel alongside such amazing activists. So as Aiden just said, my name is Anna, and I'm a proud rank and file member of QP Local 3903. And I'm also part of a group called Independent Jewish Voices, which is a grassroots group of Jews and supporters across Canada who are committed to ending Palestinian oppression. So I've been in unions since I got my first job in an emergency shelter at 19. And now, as someone who's barely ever stepped foot outside of North America, I at first didn't really understand why the labor movement would concern itself with international matters. And at first, I failed to see the irony of telling this to my coworkers, many of whom were migrant women, right? But it was these same comrades who actually helped me see that nothing about the labor movement is contained within borders, and that international solidarity is actually part and parcel of how we get good jobs, good wages, and good lives, both here and abroad, right? And so we know that we're living in an age of global capitalism. Liquor store employees sell products from all over the world, and factory workers right here in Canada create products that are shipped and sold around the globe. More than that, so many union members are in Canada as a direct result of the exploitative economies in their home countries. And Canada and its workforce does not exist in a bubble, right? And that's why it's so important that we as the labor movement get involved not only in what's happening here, but also what's happening over there, right? And this is what's called transformative solidarity, where class interests unite us over all of our other differences, right? And so we know that Canada's labor movement has a big role to play in international solidarity. And we know this because we've actually seen it during South African apartheid. So during apartheid, and particularly during the 70s and 80s, it was actually in part because of the union members and grassroots groups like the South African Trade Union Solidarity Committee and Anti-Apartheid Network that prompted key labor groups like the Canadian Labour Congress to get involved and take a hard stance against South African apartheid. And it's these labor groups, as well as churches and other grassroots organizations, that put so much pressure on our prime minister and our government that they actually had to act. And so the campaigns that were enacted within Canada during the South African apartheid was a call for solidarity with workers in South Africa. So it was a call from within South Africa, from unions to unions in Canada for solidarity, right? And there were campaigns that called for a boycott, divestment, and sanction of South Africa and all of their goods, right? And basically the idea within this is that they wanted to stop funding the apartheid and stop allowing it to profit under these terrible conditions, right? And so one of the ways that labor was able to do this was by refusing South African goods, right? So refusing to work with things like South African produce, to stock South African wines, and also refusing to send products to South Africa. So refusing to send the cars that you built in your factories here over to South Africa to be used in the apartheid, right? And that's so important because as workers, people didn't want their labor and their products, like cars, to be used in carrying out apartheid and in committing these human rights violations. And labor all over the world isn't paying attention to where their labor is going to, right? And so a lot of times these groups themselves actually had to do the research and find out, where is this item being shipped to? Who owns this company? Because that sort of information isn't widely shared, and that's intentional, right? But, you know, it was because of these activists within the labor movement that so many people were able to see, like, wow, it's my product, my organization that's helping fuel this human rights violation in South Africa, right? And so that led to these really amazing coordinated job actions. And these were so powerful because it shows the power of the labor movement here and how quickly our society will crumble without all these workers, right? So there were some amazing actions taken, like postal workers refusing to deliver mail from South Africa, or secretaries refusing to connect phone calls from South Africa. There were things like longshoremen refusing to accept cargo boats from South Africa, or refusing to load cargo onto boats headed for South Africa, right? As well as boycotting using South African produce and things like that, right? And so just with all the amazing things that labor has won right here, like EI and maternity leave, people pay attention when these services that are so relied on suddenly stop working, right? Especially when there's coordination between various sectors and various unions, right? And it was actually this grassroots activism that finally pushed the Canadian government to act and take a stand against South African apartheid, right? And, Canada on its own is not going to act on these issues because they benefit from these systems. They're in fact enacting similar systems right here, right? So Israel, Canada, and South Africa have all shared these, we could think of like colonial tricks of the trade, right? So the very same path system that was used in South African apartheid was taken from the Canadian Indian Act. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we've enacted here was modeled on South Africa. And of course, we all share this love of land theft and dispossessing Indigenous people from the land in order to profit, right? And so that's a big reason why Canada hasn't severed ties with Israel, despite these call outs from the United Nations and other international bodies saying that Israel is committing human rights violations, right? Because it's not in Canada's interest to intervene, because that would stop this exchange of goods and ideas and make Canada look really hypocritical, right? But we can see that there's so many similarities between what was happening in South Africa during apartheid and also what's happening in Israel today. And that's why both have been labeled as official apartheid states, right? And that's also why the Canadian government is so hesitant to take a stand on either of these issues, right? But another really amazing similarity is both of these struggles have had a call from within for global support. So we in the rest of the world have been given this amazing invitation and framework of boycott, divestment, and sanction for trade unions to engage on. And that call came in 2005 from Palestinian civil organizations, 170 of them, which included many trade unions. So we've seen the importance that Canada's labor movement can have in these struggles, but we need more people to join the movement, right? And so, you might be asking, like, what can we do from here? But there's a lot, and we've learned that from South Africa, right? And so, one of the most important things we need to be doing in our labor movements is political education. Do your comrades actually know what's going on in in Palestine right now? And so events like this of spreading public awareness, but also, little educational segments during, your meetings. And if your union is anything like mine, you have a lot of meetings. So there's plenty of opportunities to engage in this public education, right? And that's because we need to bring in the rank and file members to really get momentum behind this. We can also be passing resolutions, right? Making these public stances and setting a precedent for other sectors to engage in Palestinian solidarity and support the BDS movement, right? So, CUPE Ontario actually passed Resolution 50 in 2006 that supports the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement and recognizes the rights of Palestinians. And then, more than resolutions, these resolutions really need to lead to actions, right? And as, members of the labor movement, we have so many special ways that we can act on these issues, right? So we can explore things like where our pensions are going. And oftentimes pensions are invested in things that are actually supporting Israeli apartheid, right? So divesting from those things is a very clear way that unions can say, we don't want our labor and our hard-earned money and effort to go into Israeli apartheid. And as well, what's so special to the labor movement is our ability to do production boycotts, right? So things like Block the Boat campaigns, which have been very popular in Vancouver and California, where, again, similar to in South Africa, there's a refusal to unload cargo or load cargo that's going directly to support Israeli apartheid, right? And these things we know can be taken on in a variety of workplaces, and there's so many different workplaces that are unionized. But it's also important to remember that we're consumers and we can take action that way too. So boycotting products in our own lives and joining in these sort of actions in our own everyday lives is also a really important way that we can end Israeli apartheid. And I think what's so amazing about this call is that none of us here have to reinvent the wheel on this, because we already have this fantastic model whose success that we've seen, and we get to work off that, right? But it does take a at least semi-coordinated mass movement of workers and unions to make that happen, right? And that's what this launch is about. So all of us here today are starting this campaign and this movement within the workers' movement to call attention to the Palestinian cause and to end our collective support for it here in Canada. So I hope you all join. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. There's so much great stuff to pull out of what you spoke about. I love your quote that nothing about the labor movement is contained within borders. And that's so important for us to understand as trade union activists in Canada. It's not just about our wages and working conditions. It's this idea that none of us are free until all of us are free, right? And we have an obligation as union activists here to make sure that we are supporting the Palestinian struggle for liberation, because that is bound up in our own freedom. And thank you for those reminders also about the Canadian complicity in apartheid and our own legacy of colonization and dispossession, and the reminders of the concrete action that the labor movement in Canada took to help end apartheid in South Africa. So yes, thanks so much, Anna. Just a reminder to all of our participants, you're welcome to use the Q&A function to type in a question and submit it. We're kind of gathering the questions as they come in, so you're feel free to start doing that. And I'm going to now introduce our final speaker, who we're really excited to have join us. Our final speaker is Mametwe Sabeh. Mametwe is an active member of the International Socialist Alternative, which is an international Marxist party to which Socialist Alternative Canada is an affiliate. He is a member of the National Executive Committees of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa and the South African Federation of Trade Unions. And it was in that role that he led the 2022 strike against an Israeli-owned company, Clover Dairy. He's also a lecturer in the Department of Jurisprudence in the University of South Africa. So Mametwe, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you all see me? Can you hear me?
We can see you and hear you, yeah.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chair and comrades, for the honor of this invitation to form, part in this important discussion, which really speak to, working class solidarity and internationalism in the context of repression and colonial settler project, in the Palestinian lands. I mean, much has been said about the historical analogy of apartheid and what is happening in Israel, Palestine, and I'm going to speak about that. But for that reason, the apartheid, and of course, in this situation, a pro-Palestinian sentiment in South Africa, obviously, is probably, much more advanced than in many parts of the world. And that is because, the Black working class in particular here, with the memory of apartheid, they are able to see in Israel its colonial policies towards the Palestinian, the land dispossession, the evictions, the systemic discrimination, racialized and so on, the repression and all the things, the daily humiliations of the Palestinian masses, the stringent regulations of their movement, their super exploitation, and all of that. They are able to see in that their own history, the history of repression, the history of racism, the history of apartheid in this country. And flowing from that experience, the sympathy and a sense of solidarity with the people of Palestine is therefore not very difficult to make case for, particularly with the great majority of the population in this country being, of course, the Black working class in particular. But also because of that very history as well, we in many ways have a situation where even the ruling party, which is the ANC, which has its roots in the struggles against apartheid and colonialism in this country, officially has the position that it supports the struggle for Palestinian independence and, of course, for an end of a brutal military colonial occupation and the land dispossessions of the masses of Palestine. So there is that an official policy, and I think it is worth making a point that I think within the national liberation movement in this country, that is in the trade unions, in the political parties of the national liberation movement, and of course in the community civics, but widely amongst oppressed in this country, there was consensus in terms of the support for the Palestinian cause. And I think that in many ways was made easier by the direct contacts and particularly the diplomatic relations as well as economic relations that existed between apartheid, South Africa, and Israeli imperialism, the support that Israeli imperialism, including their cooperation in development of the nuclear armament, of an apartheid regime, made the if you like, the feeling that we are oppressed by similar regimes and therefore we have a common cause with the people of Palestine. Again, that made that very easy, and of course, the heritage of that community of struggles between the Black working class in this country and the Palestinian masses exists to this day in the legacy of an overwhelming, working class, or rather sense of working class solidarity in support with the people of Palestine. Of course, there has been changes and shifts, particularly in the ANC policy in the post-1994 period, that when they assumed power, although formally in their rhetoric, in their conference declarations, but also in the declaration of their own ministers, they still support the Palestinian cause. Nonetheless, they have maintained a diplomatic relations with Israel, but also what we have seen is an increasing economic cooperation between the two countries. In many ways, we also see the penetration of Israeli capital in most important sections of the South African industry, including in the food manufacturing, which is where we are organizing one of the biggest companies, the dairy, which is a producer of dairy product, Clover, where we had one of the longest strike, but also one of the most important campaign of an international working class solidarity with the people of Palestine, certainly and arguably the most important such campaign to come out of the workers' movement in a post-apartheid period. Now, I think as Marxists, we always make the point that, a foreign policy of any government is merely an extension and rather application at an international plane of the domestic policy of that government. And what does that mean? It means that once the ANC came to power, once the ANC assumed responsibility to preside over a capitalist system, a system that dispossessed the black working class in this country, that subject them to a most brutal forms of exploitation, a colonial capitalism that we see. That betrayal extends also to betrayals of the basic principle by which the ANC actually came to power, which was a foreign policy dedicated on support for a national self-determination of the oppressed people everywhere, and all the laudable principle that, of course, in the course of the struggle against apartheid, in the course of the struggle, to win international solidarity, the ANC had to adopt as a premise of its foreign policy, which was supposed to translate into a government policy in a post-1994 period. But the betrayal of the aspirations for a better South Africa, for a more socially just, and I dare to argue that the overwhelming sense in a struggle against apartheid expressed in the language of the workers' movement in this country, that socialism means freedom, that apartheid and capitalism are two sides of the same blood coin, that apartheid can be reformed, but it must be dismantled along with capitalism that makes it necessary. Once the ANC has, betrayed all of that, which compromise with the white and apartheid elite in this country, supported by Western imperialisms in particular in that cause, it was inevitable that their integration into a global elite means that they are going to be betraying the struggles of the oppressed people who looked at South Africa for inspiration, but also expected of the ANC in government, for solidarity. And that, in a final analysis, flow from the from the premise that capitalism as a system of global production and distribution, through its supply chain, but also material interest of the elite that dominates economies, across the world, sections of capitalist class with each other, and in this case, the ANC and the capitalist elite it represents, and the cooperations that they own and that dominate the economy are not exceptions. They are integrated in the system of global production, in the system of global capitalism, through the markets, and therefore they find more common cause with them than with the oppressed masses of Palestine, who have nothing to offer from an economic point of view, except their labor that is exploited, the same way that the ANC has accepted the slavery of the black working class in this country, and of course, and perpetuate the system of exploitation, repression that comes with it, and the feeling within the sections of the Black working class that actually apartheid is not over, that 25 years into democracy, the Black working class continue to be the face of unemployment, of poverty, and all the ills that flow from that. The violence, the violent crime, the GBV, all of that continue to be the lot that is suffered by that, and of course, that explains the outlook of the ANC in terms of the repression of other people and so on. Now, I think insofar as the labor movement, the sentiment remains, but I think it's important to also underline that COSATU in particular, which remains the biggest trade union in the country, by virtue of its alliance with the ANC, although its rank and file have consistently demanded action on the question of Palestine, and I think that hot breath of rank and file sentiment is reflected in the outlook, at least official, of the Federation, and occasional statements coming from the people of Palestine, and all of that. That hasn't translated very much into action. And I think that, unfortunately, also has been the case with most of the trade unions for some time. What we have then done, building on the sentiment that is there, was that when the split in the labor movement took place, in the aftermath of the brutal massacre of the mine workers by the ANC government in 2012, August, in what came to be known as Marikana massacre, that led to the split in the workers' movement, with vast sections of COSATU feeling we cannot be supporting the workers, that not only has it betrayed the working class on the fundamental policy questions, on the question of the struggle against colonial capitalism, but has now turned into the butchers of the mine workers, that is a government that is actually in a state of war, political and class war, with the working class in all the main theaters of the working class struggle in this country, on the industrial plane, on the community, in the communities, in campuses, many strikes, and with killings of workers and activists. And I think when the split took place, the workers' movement particularly view to say, what is it, or what compromise did the workers' movement make in terms of its principles, in order to accommodate itself to the policy of compromises of COSATU, and to accommodate itself to the betrayals of the ANC, in relation to which COSATU remain in alliance and so on. And part of that was to say, we want to build a union that is fighting, campaigning, not only in terms of issues concerning the workers domestically, better conditions of employment and all of that, but also on matters of working class solidarity and internationalism, which is a foundation of the workers' movement in this country, expressed in a slogan that was a founding principle of COSATU, to say an injury to a worker anywhere is an injury to workers everywhere, and so on. Now, we since identified Palestine as one of areas alongside Zimbabwe as priority areas, and I think when the opportunity, when the Israeli company Melco took over majority stake in Clover, it was then said, look, Giusa and FAO that organized that factory must take a lead. We had a long battle legally, but also occasional protest that culminated into a prolonged strike that took place last year. Actually, it started in December 2021 and went on for months. Even to this day, we have not signed an agreement. Of course, we have had to retreat with some of the workers back at place, but without signing an agreement as trade unions, because some of our members are outside. And one of the issues that made the agreement impossible was the fact that we refused to take the issue of divestment from the table. not when the ANC insisted, not when the company said we can't compromise with you with that demand still on the table. But I think the only lesson to take from there is that really the only genuine solidarity that we can trust is really a working class solidarity, which flow from a recognition that the enemy is one, the system that oppressed, that exploit us is one, and it's capitalism. And I think that we're going to place our trust on government, including government with a roots, in the struggle that enjoyed overwhelming international solidarity from the working class, from oppressed people everywhere. The struggle against apartheid is evident in the ANC that these bourgeois parties and bourgeois governments cannot be trusted, and not, slightest faith must be placed on them. And I think even the struggle against apartheid is really very instructive in that respect. There was widespread working class solidarity, and I think that was reflected by, sanctions that were imposed by governments. But the reality is that many of the big corporations and governments that officially had those positions collaborated with apartheid. Many of the big corporations broke those sanctions, and governments in many of the countries that had those positions officially allowed those companies to do that. It was that working class solidarity that kept the pressures on those governments, and of course, did to some degree demanded, or rather resulted in some level of accountability, which was obviously heightened, of course, with the rise in the revolt of the black working class domestically and so on. So therefore, I think my argument is that ultimately the struggle for Palestinian independence has to rest with the working class. Instead of us just placing faith in the government like those of the ANC here, we have now turned towards the labor movement. We are saying beyond Clover, we are looking for other companies which are owned by Israeli companies, particularly those companies that are linked with Jewish settlements in Palestinian lands, that are linked with Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands and any other imperialist activities inside Palestine and so on, and other human rights abuses of the Palestinian people. And we are going to be targeting those companies, linking the struggles of the workers in those factories, and linking the struggles of the workers that are in the supply chains of those petrol companies with the cause of the Palestinian workers, because we believe only such actions build genuine solidarity and direct linkages between the struggles here and the struggles of the oppressed people of Palestine. And that, we believe, is the only base on which we can really be able to build a solid pro-Palestinian working class movement in this country. I think as I conclude on this note, look, we have had a debate, and I think comrades, I said I'll touch on this, and perhaps I just need to say, in conclusion, I think it's obviously useful for us to use the analogies, apartheid Israel, in reference to apartheid South Africa. And I think there's obviously and there's nothing wrong with the usage of the term for agitational purposes, right? Because of the way that apartheid was much hated. But I also think that there's a limit to that analogy and even the danger that comes with it in terms of the strategy and perspective. Because what was apartheid? Apartheid was, if you like, a military police state that rested on the white minority, that promoted white supremacist ideas, and the result of which is that you had, if you like, an elevation of white minority here into a racial caste, loading over even when it is working class, occupying supervisory position in the interest of imperialism, to facilitate the exploitation of a cheap migrant black labor. But the black labor was always essential to capitalism in this country. I think what you are having in Palestine, I think is qualitatively different in that sense. And that is not to say that makes the system better. If anything, it makes it even more worse. It makes it even more dangerous. Because black labor was always essential to accumulation of capital in this country. It was never dispensable. Genocide in many ways was never really posed, even when there was an overwhelming military superiority of an apartheid regime, which was the most powerful military in the whole continent, and arguably one of the most powerful in the world at that time, that was nuclear armed, right? In Palestine, you have a systematic displacement of the Palestinian people, and in that system of settler colonialism is lodged a genocidal logic, not only to displace people, but I also think that you cannot rule out, in that sense, the genocidal depopulation of the whole of Palestine through ethnic cleansing, which is taking place. But I think that it can always be, escalated. They were obviously not at that level. There is but a war of attrition to ultimately evict all the people of Palestine. But I also think that, as I said, there is a genocidal logic in that system and so on. But also, there are also questions of the strategy. What becomes the role of what is our position regarding the role, or rather the potential, right, so to speak, of the Israeli working class itself in the struggle for Palestinian independence? Because the difference between here and there is this. White workers here always occupy such a position of privilege, and I think that's the same with the Jewish working class, in Israeli Palestinian context. But also, unlike there, where there's a systematic eviction of the people of Palestinian origin in territories that are now considered part of Israel, it means that you actually have a low-paid oppressed layers of the Israeli working class, some of which actually are drawn from all over the world, including significant layers of the Black population that are discriminated inside Palestine itself. What becomes their role in the struggle, and what becomes our approach and our perspective in that? And I think that's a question that would be interesting for discussion. Thank you very much, and my apologies for taking such a long time. Thank you.
No apologies needed. Thank you so much, Mamatloe. I think it's, it's so important for us to understand this struggle kind of around the growing solidarity between the Black working class and the Palestinian people that's happening at the same time as, increasing economic cooperation between South Africa and Israel, and that this is all kind of in the structure of global capitalism. And it reminds us that resistance to apartheid in Palestine and Palestine solidarity must come from below. And we as workers are well positioned to lead that struggle. And even as your case showed, to use the power of the strike in that struggle. So thank you so much for your contributions. So next on the agenda for everybody, we have a cultural intervention into our program for today. Before we start that, I just want to give a reminder that we will be having a short follow-up meeting to take the next steps on this campaign, to actually, roll it out and to, pull more people into the organizing and rollout of the campaign. That follow-up meeting is going to be February 2nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. There was a glitch with the date of the meeting in the first link that we put in the chat, but it's been corrected now. So if you go back to that original link, or I think that the link is likely going to be appearing in the chat momentarily again, then it'll take you to the correct date, which is February 2nd, 8:30 p.m. So let's have some culture, and then we'll move on to the question and answer period after that. So last year, Labor for Palestine partnered with Mayworks, which is the festival of working people and the arts, to work with local artists who produced really amazing art that captures the intersections between the labor movement and the Palestine Solidarity Movement. So the video and the poem that we're going to watch is by Maysam Ikhani, who's an aspiring educator, poet, and organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement in Toronto. We're going to watch, for now, just the first two parts of the video and poem that she created, called Revolution Must Mean Life. This work was envisioned and supported through a series of interviews with organizers from Labor for Palestine on Turtle Island and organizers on the ground in Palestine, situated in Al-Khalil, Nablus, Qalqilia, and Ramallah. The organizers in Palestine provided much of the footage from the ground that you'll see in the video. And we're going to play also the last segment of the video at the very end of our event today. So stay tuned for that.
Sorry about that, everyone. I got to unmute, apparently.
Every Zionist that arrives in Palestine is one more brick in the structure of the proposed Zionist state.
We who let your cities breathe, clean the water you sip from so endlessly. We who handcrafted jewelry from your artillery, only to be swallowed down your throats, to rot in your stomachs, bubble in your indecency. We who dug the dirt so that the sewage pipes could cut through roots. We who do not weep at the sight of your carcerality. We who know how your knuckles gouge the earth so that you may gouge our eyes as your wallets grow thicker. We, merchants, dock workers, postal servants, teachers, do not consent to your pyramid scheme. We, the graduates of the desert winds. This is the language of the working class, third world, scum of the earth, fingers turned to bones, nails that know the grime of your warmongering factories. We, workers made disposable, yet are of undeniable elemental necessity, suffering and heroism, bitterness and devotion, sacrifice and courage, steadfast persistence. The revolution of those buried beneath the wealthy. This is for all the words we cannot say, for when we have the courage for the overthrow of wage slavery. This is a new establishment. This poem does not apologize. This revolution cannot apologize. We fed your cities our limbs, your empires our homes, our labor, as you feast on extractive mentalities.
If the Security Council should decide that it is necessary to use armed force to maintain international peace in connection with Palestine, the United States would be ready.
This is a lineage unchained. Prisoners' songs smuggled past confined spaces, bites metal bars and stone walls. Resistance poems were made out of this. Unstuck, untangled, unbroken, this is profit, eats soil, eats land, feasts on bullets made supreme. Workers who have nothing but their labor, embargo, forgo, and seize. They thought they won after 48. This is profit eats soil, man sinks into despair. This is despair. We have everything to lose. This is do not pass the picket line unless you are ready to pass the checkpoint, unless you hurled the first rock, grazed the desert for a crust of bread, squeezed your body through the revolving doors before the school bell rang. This is young girl, carry school bag at Bard Road, soldiers camouflage and ruptured kindergarten recess with rifle, and the children learn not to flinch. You will never understand because you have never lived it. This is beyond dialogue. Resist the bullet wherever it is fired. Let them drown in the bricks of their cities, knowing the hands who cemented them together. True people of the land live and cultivate the revolution. This is the labor of the falah, limbs and land and roots, one of the same. This is subsistence. Charge the world. Quiet despair fills the cup, evens the rations. Come walk the line of despair, march with them. This is the battle of Karame against the citadel. Refuse to be their appendage. This is a wall that speaks, the chain that breaks, the lost sandal at the end of the great march of return. Do not bargain at their expense. Rip the propaganda to shreds. This is a life worth living. This is a life worth living. This is a life worth living. The people have spoken. We are not the property of empire. They cannot tip the scales now. This is the people united. This is the people united. This is the revolution.
It is high time that Palestine's right.
All right, really powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Maisam, who I know is on this meeting here today as well. And again, we will show the conclusion of that video at the end of our event here today. For now, though, let's just move on to the question and answer session. Again, just before jumping on there, just a reminder that meeting on February 2nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, that's for if you want to get involved in the central organizing of this Labor Against Apartheid campaign, come to that meeting. If you want to start taking action in your union or in your workplace on this campaign, come to that meeting. It won't be a long meeting, but it will have more information about kind of those kinds of next steps in terms of really rolling this thing out there. And again, if you want to invite Labor for Palestine to make a presentation to your union or your labor council, send us an email, let us know, and we'll set something up for you. We'll drop our email address into the chat again as well. So moving on to the question and answer period, we have a few questions that have come in. I'm going to just ask maybe if all of our speakers could turn their cameras back on, and then we'll put some questions to you that have come from our participants here. Okay, I see Lena and Anna. Mametwe, are you able to turn your camera back on as well? Perfect, beautiful. So a question from our participants here saying, I'm wondering how we can help encourage and support BDS in general, but specifically through the establishment of apartheid-free zones in the labor movement. Apartheid-free zones seem to be a particularly effective way of spreading the word about Palestine solidarity and about BDS as a tactic. So thoughts from any of our panelists about the establishment of apartheid-free zones in labor in Canada?
I'm happy to speak to that. I think, these sorts of initiatives like apartheid-free zones, any sort of public awareness campaign that gets the word out there is really great, and is also something that can be, taken on by labor movements to sort of encourage internally their workplaces to abide by BDS and, in that way, be like apartheid-free zones.
Thanks, Anna. And to me, I'll just jump in with my thoughts on this one also. To me, that's kind of like, that question is in a way at the heart of how do we roll out this campaign and make it effective? Because if we can map out in each union or in each workplace how we ourselves are complicit in apartheid in our own unions and in our own workplaces, that's what makes this powerful, right? Because then that becomes our site of struggle, right? That then we know that, if my union has a contract with Hewlett-Packard to get Hewlett-Packard technology, laptops or printers or whatever, We know that Hewlett-Packard is complicit in building the wall and in contributing to military infrastructure in Palestine. Now we have something to organize around. Now we have something to say, my union should no longer be complicit in Israeli apartheid through its contract with Hewlett-Packard. And I want my union to be an apartheid-free zone. That means ending that contract. Or, if I know that I'm in a workplace that whose pension fund, and, folks, our panelists talked about pension funds and divestment. If my pension fund in my workplace is invested in companies that are complicit in Israeli apartheid, now we have something to organize a divestment campaign around there as well. And then we can build, that can be the beginning of an apartheid-free zone in that workplace as well. So I think that's kind of that's the vision for this campaign as we roll it out is, all of us have some sort of a complicity in one way or the other. There's no way that we don't. And if we can build, find our coworkers or union comrades and start to identify what are those points of complicity in our context, then we can, start doing the work of ending that complicity. And again, Labor for Palestine is here to support that work as well. And I'll just see if any of our other panelists want to speak to that question as well. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. This one is specifically for Lena. So Lena, what is the history of Israeli settler colonial society using Palestinian conscripted coerced labor after 1948 and up to the present?
Well, yeah, like any other modern capitalist colonial power, the Zionist settler colonial project involved the destruction of the mode of production of Palestinians. By controlling and dispossessing Palestinian lands, the main mean of production for Palestinians then before 1948, a process of huge proletarization had been imposed on Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands of the Palestinian workers became dependent on the Israeli colonial economy. By destructing the Palestinian economic development and distorting it, Palestine became the main market for Israeli commodities also. Today, even the colonial techniques of exploiting the Palestinian labor force in the West Bank and in Gaza is transforming into a genocidal logic, a policy of getting rid of Palestinians, enclaving them, separating them from each other, controlling the remaining lands, and killing them. Just like what's happening in Gaza, under the military attacks and under the siege. Gaza had turned into a laboratory for the Israeli arms industry. Nevertheless, Palestinians continue, and specifically the wretched, the workers, the poor people continue to resist and provide an example of for steadfastness and for sumud and struggling for a liberated future. Therefore, solidarity with Palestinians should be based on their own resistance, not on what we see today as humanitarian bases. Therefore, the radical political solidarity from mass labor unions is highly important for Palestinians.
Thank you, Lena. We have another question in the chat that I think stems from something that you spoke to, Mehmet Lue, around the notion of genocide. So you spoke about the kind of the genocidal impacts of what is happening in Palestine. And wondering, maybe Lina and Mehmet, you might both like to speak to this, but if you could expand a little bit more on that notion of that framework that you spoke to.
Thank you. I think it is not really either or, but also I think the use of the term genocide, I said there's a genocidal logic. There's always a danger in saying something is happening when we have not reached that stage. That by the time that it actually happened, you have to completely disarm people and they say, well, it has been happening. And what is happening? I don't think that's where we are, but I think you can't say that's not where we're headed. In fact, I'm just saying that logic is lost in the position and the colonial project of Israeli imperialism, the whole colonial settler state, which is really about displacing the native population of the Palestinians with an imported labor. And I think, and for me, that's where the fundamental distinctions actually lies. Capitalism ultimately is a system of extraction of surplus labor for profiteering of the capitalist class. Now, the important question that we need to ask, because this is a thing that was very fundamental to South African to apartheid regime here, right? The black labor was the mainstay of South African capitalism. Under apartheid, as it is now, there was never a perspective from the capitalist and imperialist strategists in this country that the white minority labor can ever be a substitute for a cheap migrant black labor. Even when they created Bantustan, homelands, and other things, it was always going to be that these were going to be reserves, labor reserves areas for South African capitalism. In fact, the whole system here was inimical to the idea of having a white person doing a security guard job, doing a domestic work, doing the most exploitative job underground in the mine, in the factory, the low-skilled jobs, and all of that were the lot and the yoke of the black working class. Now, you can't say the same with regard to Israeli, which in its expansion is really about displacing a Palestinian labor and a Palestinian masses with the Jewish labor and Jewish settlements in Palestinian areas. And I think those are important differences that need to be highlighted, not, of course, without taking away the usefulness for agitational purposes of apartheid as a tech to highlight the day-to-day racialized bigotry and discrimination, humiliations, and restrictions on the ordinary people of Palestine and so on. And I think for me, that's very fundamental. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mehmet. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this question? Okay.
I just want to add that the genocidal logic in settler colonial regimes work in various forms. It could be through killing, but also through integrating the colonized into the settler colony as individuals, as separated, as apolitical entities. So these are also different forms of the genocidal logic within settler colonial regimes. Thanks,
Lina. So we're approaching the end of our allotted time for today, and so this has flown by really fast. There's a couple of other questions in the chat, but one of them in particular I think could be a really great jumping off point for our follow-up discussion, which will happen on February 2nd, around how can we respond as trade unionists and in the labor movement in Canada to calls that are put out by the BDS movement, the BDS National Committee, to boycott specific corporations. Like, what can our role be in responding to those specific calls that are coming from Palestine? So that can be, I think that's a really important, maybe strategic discussion that we could start in that meeting on February 2nd. So for now, I think just a reminder that if you do want to get involved in this campaign, around how to bring this campaign to your union or to your workplace, how to be involved in the central rollout of it, join that follow-up meeting on February 2nd, 8:30 Eastern time, PM, 8:30 PM Eastern time. Nobody wants an 8:30 AM meeting. If you want to invite us to come and deliver a presentation to your union or your workplace, send us an email in the chat. The email address has been in the chat. We'll set it up. Make sure to check out our fact sheets online, our resources on these issues. Be sure to stay tuned for that toolkit that's coming out with the step-by-step info on how to build a committee, how to pass a resolution, how to act on a resolution. So check out that campaign page on the Labor for Palestine website. And really want to give a real big final thank you to our panelists, so Lena and Mametle and Anna. Your contributions have been so valuable to us in helping to think these issues through and helping us to launch this campaign in a really exciting way. Thank you to our endorsing organizations, Independent Jewish Voices, the Palestinian Youth Movement, to CISO again for the interpretation services, and to our interpreters, Jean and Justin, who have done an incredible job translating simultaneously into French. So beautiful to see so many people out today. We're looking forward to building this movement with you in the labor movement for the liberation of Palestine. We hope to see you at a follow-up movement, the follow-up meeting on February 2nd, and to work alongside you on this campaign. And we're now just going to play the last part of Maysem's work, Revolution Must Mean Life, as we close the event. So great to see you all, and thanks again to our panelists, and we'll play you out with the video.
That Palestine's right to independence be recognized.
Revolution must mean writing the story that has yet to unfold.
And that this tormented country enjoy the blessing of a democratic government.
Revolution must mean being silent enough to hear the tired heartbeats of the earth, follow their blueprint, the footprints of the merchants whose ceramics color the streets of El Khalil. Revolution must mean we do not normalize shaking the hand that points the gun, spills the blood, builds the walls, eats the soil without knowing its name. Revolution must mean tilling the land with spoons for tunnels. Maximum security cannot contain this. Continue to walk the long intifada. Revolution must mean no false promises. Palestine transcends symbols and resolutions. Knock down the walls that suffocate Kalkilia. Cameras capture struggles daily. Expose the nerve. Shatter their screens. Revolution must mean a blow to the head of the ministries, a politician who speaks of peace, a beacon of hope. A state that obliterates life is that hope. It's a simple truth. The same state that utilizes labor to build their democracy manufactures the weapons of our destruction collectively. In the belly of the beast, we are afforded more than life itself. We must show reverence for those whose hands crack open when they knock on the gates of empire. Remember that the soul hums towards the direction of the sun. This is men in the sun, people who wake up every dawn with the will to live. Poetry, our armory, our weaponry, our currency. To love for the revolution means to change the trajectory. Everyday people, everyday martyrs, sacrificial for survival. We work to eat, to salvage, to graze. Revolution must mean that the truth always washes ashore eventually.
So thank you so much again, Mason, for producing that. And again, so great to see everybody here this afternoon. And hope to see you on February 2nd, and hope to see you in a Palestine campaign, Palestine solidarity campaign very soon. Have a good afternoon.